AI has been part of our culture for so long, through science fiction, through movies, through comic books, everything else, or every type of media, we've encountered something to do with AI, a story around AI. So we kind of understand it from a cultural perspective, which is why the adoption of it has been so rapid, because it has literally been the first time that culturally impactful technology has been accessible to everybody at the same time. You sort of touched on a really interesting point about almost content mediocrity in a way, or the churning out of more mediocre content because it can be automated to the point where everybody is talking like Gary Vaynerchuk on LinkedIn, and every post sounds exactly the same because we're all using ChatGPT to generate it, and it just gets into this kind of sort of vicious cycle. And then at some point, someone will have the epiphany and go, "Oh, now maybe what if I wrote this myself?" And then rediscovers their voice actually has more weight and credence than this thing that actually spits out almost perfect coffee, but is sanitized and has no soul, in a sense. I think we're quite happy to accept the dystopian image because it's been portrayed in science fiction and Black Mirror and been fed to us all the time, and we're all like tutting away going, "Oh, this is terrible." But it's happening around us, and we seem to want to just let it happen because we have this perception that we can't do anything to change the course. Well, of course we can. There's 8 billion of us who can change the course of what's going on. And I think it's just a case of, now's AI might be that galvanizing point, like it is with so many of the converging discussions that we've had, where one of those convergent threads is we have 8 billion people who might actually stand up and go, "Well, I don't actually like this. I like to use the tool and I want it to be, but I want it to be used for good," along with, "I don't really like capitalism or extreme capitalism anymore. I want to make money a different way. I want to add and contribute to society. I want to help that person over there, and they help the next person. We pay it forward," and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Welcome back to Invisible Machines. Today, Rob, we're having a conversation with a futurist and an author, Theo Priestley. He and co-author Bronwyn Williams kind of curated this book called The Future Starts Now. It has some of their ideas, and then they curated essays or chapters from leading futurists all over the globe to kind of get a full and diverse vision of what the future might look like. And one thing I think that really stuck out to me as I was listening to the book on audio is that a lot of being a futurist isn't just sort of sitting back and thinking about the future. It's actually finding ways that you can engage and identify points where you can make an impact and try and guide the world towards the future that you think would be most equitable or favorable. So it really got me excited because I kind of realized that in writing a book, Age of Invisible Machines, that was kind of an expression of futurism right there.
Right, yeah, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You tell the future, you evangelize the future, and the future becomes what you predicted. It's kind of interesting. It's easier for folks like Elon Musk, I imagine, who have a lot more resources make it happen. He's his own futurist, right? And yeah, my dad joke here is, who is a futurist that now lives in the future that they predicted? And that's an interesting conversation because we're here and things are moving so fast that futurists find themselves in the present before people even read their prediction of what was going to happen. So who is a futurist that is now in the present of what they predicted. And yeah, it's so hard now for them to think about what the future holds with so much convergence of technology between, things like blockchain and, AI, conversational AI, machine learned, algorithms, biotech, just the list goes on and on and on, longevity.
Yeah.
There's so many different components, self-driving cars. Like you try
When
to
you
put
can
it
add
all
like
together,
you can add like societal things and climate change, all
right?
those things to the mix. They all play into these
Yeah.
convergences.
And whenever you talk to any of the experts in these fields, they tend to look at them in a static world. They sort of imagine that the things around that invention will stay the same, and their invention or their idea of that technology in the future is the only changing thing. So if I was talking to an expert in teleportation, which I don't even know if such an expert exists, but if I were to talk to one, I think they would say, you could wake up in the morning and teleport to the bathroom next to your room without getting out of bed, just instantly arrive, and then teleport to your car, which you really don't need anymore, right? And then you go, wait, like you don't need a car, so you're not going to be teleporting there. They may get that, right? That cars are unnecessary, but what they may not fully understand is by then the home changes, and we may just have a building somewhere with just bathrooms in it. And then our room where we sleep might be on the top of a mountain somewhere. And teleporting to the bathroom is probably teleporting to an available bathroom somewhere, the bottom of the mountain. Not this whole concept of a house disappears and we just have bedrooms that we share. So it's just some of these convergences of technology changes so dramatically the things around it that it's really hard to predict a future in that world. I think I've made this joke before in Star Trek when the captain or somebody on the crew is on a planet and they're like, beam me up, hurry up, Scotty. And he's like running as fast as he can to get to the
one room where you can
the one room that you can beam them up and hit the button. And meanwhile, like they have a talking computer.
Yeah.
They literally are talking to it. So why is he running, right? It's because like we don't know how to understand the world when everything around it also changes.
Well, I think
so
we also
dramatically.
like pressing buttons. We get into that with Theo too.
Right.
We just like pressing buttons. We want that safety net. That's my button. I push that button.
Exactly. Yeah. Give me the button to push to save the day. I want to be the hero.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, teleportation would, if you really just consider that one invention that's projected in a television show, as a future state, would change so much of that show, in terms of how people get around, that half of what they do makes no sense, given that one thing exists, let alone all the other things, like talking computers and everything else that's going on. So I think being a futurist, it's a super, super tough thing to triangulate at this moment. And I am interested to hear his approach to how he pulls that off.
Yeah. When you have all these overlapping convergences, it becomes very tricky. And I think another takeaway that I got from The Future Starts Now is that part of being a futurist isn't just like maybe fine tuning your one perfect future. It's sort of like conversational design, right? You don't just fine tune this one thing that you think will work. You're trying to imagine as many futures as possible. And then, I guess touching on something I think Ovetta brought up in episode 9, maybe, this idea that like if you're or you should design bad outcomes too, at least in your head, be thinking about the worst possible ways things can turn out. So the work of the futurist is very similar to the work of a designer in a way, in that or at least if you're doing design holistically.
Yeah, I guess that's a really good point. They're not fortune tellers.
Mm-hmm.
They're not. I guess a lot of us hear that they're fortune tellers, but really futurists that are taking it seriously are just really mapping the many possible outcomes. It's almost like an economist, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're predicting the multiple outcomes that that could happen based on different, moving different levers, and then looking at those different outcomes and kind of calculating a safe Greenspanish position to say, well, if we do this, it suits the largest number of outcomes. So yeah, I think that's a really good point, that futurists don't try to tell the future as much as they try to create multiple possible futures.
And then build consensus and momentum towards the ones that seem like the most favorable outcomes. So,
well, let's let him tell us. Let's hear from him. Shall
let's
we?
go to Theo. All right, Rob, good to see you. Theo, excuse me. Thanks for joining us. One of the things that we were really excited to talk with you about as we were thinking.
Purple house coat in the back there.
Oh, is there a purple house coat?
Can you see it? Just be thankful it's a purple house coat and it's not a cat litter tray. Seriously, I have a cat litter tray in here as well as cat trees and everything else. But
oh yeah,
it's nice to see a cat kind of climbing around in the background. If you want to adjust your camera angle at any time, feel free.
Yeah. People love cats online. That's the thing, right?
So as Rob and I were discussing the book, The Future Starts Now this week, we realized we're really excited to chat with you about the idea of convergence and how it seems like a central piece of futurism is kind of wrapping your head around these convergences that are always kind of occurring. And I think even right now we have like a writer's strike happening in Hollywood at a moment where generative AI is showing that it's quite nimble at creating things. I saw a post recently on LinkedIn from a UX magazine contributor, and he's a Trekkie, and so he had ChatGPT write and refine a script for an episode of Star Trek. And he admitted it wasn't great, but it was decent, and that was not even that much work. And then he also made the point that a lot of studio executives, they're constantly giving writers notes, and writers often give pushback, which I think is a good thing generally. But from a studio executive's point of view, if you can just give ChatGPT notes and see the changes right away, you could see how that would be alluring and disruptive. Not an outcome I'd consider ideal, as someone who's been writing for 25 years and understands a bit about the nuance there. But do you feel like convergences like that are the kind of things that go into being kind of a nimble futurist, like keeping your eye on things like that and thinking about those things?
Yeah, I mean, I take a broad view, and when I look at convergence, I look at several industries, and then I look at several different trends as well. The way my head works is like, if we were talking about cats earlier, it's like a bag of cats, and they're all scrabbling around with a bit of string or several bits of string, and I like to tug on different strings to see if there's actually a common thread in a way, and so AI is obviously the big hot topic just now, but AI can impact several industries, but several other trends that we've been living through already, like metaverse, Web3, blockchain, etc. So when we talk about convergence, I like to think of it as an amalgamation of several different kind of emerging trends that could intertwine eventually and all lead off in the same direction. But AI right now, in terms of that, is almost like it's tugging on some of these already, especially in the creative industry. We've seen people using it for copywriting, script writing. They're exploring generative art. People are using it to create artwork. But of course, we have to be mindful of where the training came from, and the training came from existing IP. So there's lots of questions that need to be answered before we start converging on other things as well.
Yeah, so true. And it's interesting too, because I think I was maybe envisioning enterprise leading the charge on using AI and kind of inserting it into our daily lives. But with ChatGPT coming out, you're seeing more people experimenting with this technology than enterprise does or is at the moment. And I think the term AI too, we talk about it a lot on this podcast, is so broad and encompasses so many things. it almost represents a bit of convergence. So if you add this layer of AI on top of everything else going on, lots of strings.
Yeah, I mean, we've been living with AI for years, decades, and even the concept is nothing new. And I think it's one of these, and I was on a podcast earlier, and we were talking about, why does this feel different versus the advent of the car or the Industrial Revolution? And I think it's because AI has been part of our culture for so long, through science fiction, through movies, through comic books, everything else, or every type of media, we've encountered something to do with AI, a story around AI. So we kind of understand it from a cultural perspective, which is why the adoption of it has been so rapid, because it has literally been the first time that culturally impactful technology has been accessible to everybody at the same time. And I think that has added to the hype, but also added to the massive scale and the rapid success of the adoption that we've seen over the last sort of 6 months. I mean, this thing came out, obviously it had been worked on for a number of years, but there was the commercial release was October, November for ChatGPT 3, and then you had 3.5, which was the turbo version, and now 4. It's less than 6 months, and yet look at how the adoption rate. You've got average people thinking about it. Then you've got the adoption in the enterprise. Every single facet of industry is looking at this, going, "What can I do with this, in my daily life, or as an exec? How can I put this in my business to make it run faster, to be more efficient, etc., etc." And of course, there's the impact on jobs as a result of that.
Yeah, when I look back and think, God, Josh, like 3 years ago when we were starting to write the book, we were talking about generative AI and large language models and how they were going to change everything. And we look at, GPT-3 that got released in APIs. So, ChatGPT itself, was really just like an evolution for OpenAI. It wasn't like a revolution for them, and for us, right? And as we were talking about this coming, we're telling people like, hey, this is going to change everything. This is coming. It's huge. It's blah, blah, blah. And you almost feel yourself hesitating because like the hyperbole that you hear yourself saying, right, in terms of listening through the ears of people that are, that you're talking to, you sort of start toning it down. You're almost afraid to express the gravity of what's coming. And because you look like a crazy person. And so we write it in the book, and then finally it gets released, and then it gets released in APIs, and then there's a subset of developers like, whoa, this is a pretty big deal. But still nobody really truly believes yet, because they've been lied to so many times on AI in terms of like meeting expectation. Then finally ChatGPT comes out. They put an interface so that, the rest of the world can try it. And then you sort of feels like a moment of discovery for the world, when it really was an evolution for most of us that are in the space. And it's almost like you realize, yeah, they didn't believe me. They did. Okay, I was right. They didn't believe me, because once they put their hands on it, they're like, oh my God, this is going to change everything. And you're like, that's what I've been saying. And you're like, okay, so clearly you didn't believe me when I said it. And I think there's just been so many false starts, so much promise, and then not living up to the hype. And I don't remember what podcast I was listening to, but I heard them talking about this, and I really agree. It was this idea that that there's a lot of things like blockchain that people come out and they'll talk about, especially like cryptocurrency, and they'll say this is going to change everything. But then you look around and it's not. It's not. It's a promise, right? Then you look at AI and you go, it's already changing things, right? Like, we're not talking about it's going to. It is. It's happening right around us. It's being used broadly, and And so we're not future casting at this point. We're just looking at little pockets of the world and how they're using it, and then just sharing it with the other pockets that just haven't caught up yet. And so I just wonder if there's like a cognitive dissonance on some folks that just are still in disbelief, but the rest that now are like, okay, so this is what you really meant. This is really going to change now that I get my hands on it. And now we go, what's next? Like, now that people believe it, do they hesitate? Do they go forward? Are we going to see folks that pull back and folks that move forward? And what does that mean to the folks that sort of embrace and go to the front edge? And what does that mean for those who hold back and wait for others?
A good question. I mean, a couple of things spring to mind here. One is that obviously getting ahead is useful. I think in the short term, understanding how to use this technology is almost like job protection in a way, or certainly protecting yourself in terms of your career, in terms of, you know, your own standing and where you are. Because, you know, if they say, you know, AI is not going to replace your job, someone else is using AI. Yep, very good, very quotable, I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Nothing like fear to get people going.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And I think it is useful up to a point once you understand how to use it in the correct way, and in the context of your own job and things like that. What the flip side of that is, of course, that in the longer term, what we're seeing is people using this to. This is almost like unpaid user acceptance testing and free research and development for all these for OpenAI, because, you know, you have all the developers really pushing hard and trying to break it, and then seeing what it's capable of. You know, obviously Baby AGI and AutoGPT spawning all these hundreds of little AI subroutine agents doing little subtasks and things, and it just shows, wow, this is if I can break my job down into these mini tasks, how easy is it going to be to essentially, you know, to become so productive, or 10x productivity, etc. Whereas my boss is thinking, keep training that AI because I don't have to pay you anymore. That's, you know, and I think that's the flip side here, is that, you know, as people become more au fait with it, you're adding just more levels of complexity that the AI is able to understand, and more nuance, in order to basically take that job away and be automated.
Right.
So I'm really with you, Rob, on we knew it was coming and we told you so, but we've had so many false starts. You know, you had the IBM Watson thing. Yeah, and I think that this is, you know, you had IBM Watson, you had the promise of robotic process automation, RPA, you had the old BPMS tools, you know, all those process orchestration tools, case management tools, all that kind of sort of stuff. But it was still, and it was always like, oh, we've got algorithms, we've got AI, and we know how to push work around, but it was always pushing work around. It wasn't actually completing the work with very minimal effort involved. I mean, RPA, robotic process automation, sounds like it should have been AI in a way, but really all it was screen scraping data and shifting it around from one thing to another.
Right.
Whereas GPT and Auto GPT and Baby AGI and all these tools show that you can actually get things done by a simple command.
Right.
And that should, you know, and that's
Right.
the trigger point. Like you say, we've been saying it for years. We had so many false starts, and now it's here. It's caught everybody on the hop. And again, like you were saying, the development community has jumped on this. And I think, and again, it goes back to my point about, we've seen the Industrial Revolution, and yes, we've seen cars and planes and things. Nothing has hit, and I'll quote the film title, Everything Everywhere All at Once, because that's what this has done.
Right. Yeah, it's like the new coding language is language. And now we're discovering and figuring out who's best wired to program in this new world. Is it that programming logic mentality that we've all learned as programmers? Is it linguists? who's the one suited now to kind of, you say it's not, people might say it doesn't require code, but it is. That prompting is essentially code. It's just written in language, and we sort of disregard it because it's not, technically a coding language, but it really technically is. It's still instruction to the machine. And then even though it might be vague instruction to the machine, not this sort of direct instruction. But I think a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that, and you said it, we've released this technology out, or OpenAI with ChatGPT released it out there to see what happens. Like it's a giant experiment, right? And their logic makes sense to me, which is, let's see what happens now when all it can do is generate text, right? It can't even tell time. And most people don't know that. Like, you go to ChatGPT and you ask it what time it is, it's just going to hallucinate and give you an answer that somehow resembles the common answer to that question across all of the data that's been sucked in. So what's the most common response to what time is it is what you're going to get, not the time, certainly not the time where it is, because it isn't anywhere. It's sort of on a server somewhere, and it's definitely not the time where you are when you're asking. So you look at this thing and you go, I can't even tell time. It's a long way away from taking over the world, but at the same time we see it taking over jobs. And you said RPA, and I like that as an example, because RPA to me is automating the tasks that people should have never been doing in the first place.
Well, yeah.
It's like copying from an Excel spreadsheet over to some interface, and you're thinking, like, you pay somebody to do this? This shouldn't exist. Like, this shouldn't be a job.
Yeah.
It should have never existed as a job. I don't know who loves that activity and who cherishes that. I can't wait to go to work and hit copy paste for an hour and a half. So I'm pretty sure that RPA kind of is a great example of some of the jobs we just really ought to not be doing. And there is that category of stuff we should be doing and stuff we shouldn't be doing. And I think that kind of brings up this idea of, if right now we're just generating text essentially, and that is some people's jobs, generating text, and we can all agree that it does a decent job. I don't know if you've experienced this. I have. When I go into ChatGPT, I type in a prompt, I get like a paragraph. I'm surprised how good it is. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I paste it into a document somewhere. I sleep for, I go to sleep, wake up the next morning. I read it again, and I'm like, actually, it's not that good. It's just okay. Why did I think it was so good yesterday? And now today I just kind of read it and I'm like, it's actually just okay, right? And I think I got like swept up in the expectation that it was going to suck. It sucked a lot less than I expected it to suck. So I thought it was really good. Then I pasted it, and the next morning I woke up, looked at it as if I had written it, judged it, and said, it's just okay. And so does it mean that it's going to take, jobs of creating mediocrity away, like basic things that, I don't know, you could argue shouldn't even be written in the first place. And that still those exceptional creative, those creative moments still exist and still will require humans. And therefore, all we're really talking about is just up-leveling the quality of work that humans do, versus replacing it. Like, does our taste go up? Do we expect more from customer service than we're getting? Not expect the same for cheaper, right? I don't know. What are your thoughts there? In terms
it's interesting you say
raise
that.
The bar or keep the bar where it is and just make it cheaper?
I think this is going to be dependent on where it's being used, because I've already seen copywriters, for example, claiming that their clients are now accepting good enough from ChatGPT because it saves them money. And so we might be in this kind of sort of, again, short-term experimental phase where it makes people either redundant or it reduces their earnings capacity because clients or businesses are trying it out to see what they can get away with for how long. Now, you sort of touched on a really interesting point about almost content mediocrity in a way, or the churning out of more mediocre content because it can be automated to the point where, everybody is talking like Gary Vaynerchuk on LinkedIn, and every post sounds exactly the same because we're all using ChatGPT to generate it. And it just gets into this kind of sort of vicious cycle. And then at some point, someone will have the epiphany and go, oh, now maybe what if I wrote this myself? And then rediscovers their voice actually has more weight and credence than this thing that actually spits out almost perfect coffee, but is sanitized and has no soul in a sense.
Right.
I went to the a concert hall in Edinburgh, and we watched the Royal, and I always get this wrong, Royal Scottish National Orchestra do video game themes, which was great for a couple of hours. And I was actually sitting there thinking, now, could an AI compose a theme, and from brand new, could I get it to compose a theme and I would feel the exactly same emotions as I would listening to this? And then would I feel the exact same emotions watching robots perform their instruments and things like that? And I think the answer is no. The answer is no because, well, one, watching an orchestra or watching people do their craft gives you a sense of an emotional response because you're seeing someone who pours their passion, their heart and soul into doing something. And then there's an output and it stirs you. And I think that's potentially our saving grace here, especially in the creative side of things, whereas we are still the spark of creation. At this point in time, I have to say at this point in time, until maybe ask me this question in 10 years' time, obviously. But at this point in time, there is no spark of creativity from ChatGPT and everything else because you're still having to do all the work. Like you say, you're still using a language to instruct a computer to do something to get an output. Right. Doesn't matter what the black box does. At the end of the day, the spark still comes from you and you're telling it to do something. And there might be a bit of iteration, but you're still kind of driving the wheel.
You're there.
The car.
I was in Boulder a while ago, and they have those street performers, and there's a guy who's balancing a bowling pin on his nose, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there, everyone's kind of gathering around, like, wow, this guy's balancing a bowling pin on his nose, and there's just a moment where I'm like, why does anyone care about this? Why do I care about this? Why am I stopped here? Why am I actually entertained by this? And I think it comes down to the fact that at the core of other human beings, what we admire is this sort of self-discipline, right? When we see self-discipline in other people, I think we tend to admire. It's that universal quality that we tend to admire in everyone. We go to the Olympics and we don't just see them racing. What we see behind it is the self-discipline that it took to train and be that fast, right? When we see somebody that's ripped and fit, like what we see is the self-discipline that it took for them to get there, and we admire it because it's something that we admire in ourselves, and we're proud of our own self-discipline. When we're able to kind of overcome our need to want to sit on the couch and play video games right all the time. So yeah, like seeing a robot do it, there's no self-discipline behind that. No. There's nothing to admire, right? There's the engineering that went into creating that thing that we admire. But that's fleeting. You see it, wow, that's amazing, but you move on. You don't want to see it over and over again. Whereas we're willing to see that self-discipline in each person, right? It's like, wow, imagine how much they had to practice to get that bowling pin to balance on their nose. And I only know this from having tried to balance things on my nose before, right? That's really hard. He must have really practiced for a long time. And in some way, I'm mesmerized by the fact that he actually decided to spend that much time trying to do something so ridiculous. So yeah, I don't want to see a robot balancing a bowling pin on its nose. I wouldn't be interested in that. And I think we'll always be in admiration of other people's self-discipline, and we'll always see that behind the act that they took. But when we see somebody do something like, that's fairly mediocre in nature, that didn't essentially require a high level of discipline or talent, then I think we're not that interested in that. And that tends to be the quality of output that we see, because it's the amalgamation of all of this text across the internet. It's not, it doesn't demonstrate, one human being and the amount of sacrifice that they put into creating something. So in my mind, there's just a strong likelihood that it just says everyone's got to raise the bar on self-discipline, right? They've got to, there's going to be no cheap tricks anymore. If that makes any sense. But who's to say that that's not going to have consequences? So maybe what I'm saying is we got to separate how I'm going to make money from how I'm going to live and push myself and push my limits, and do those two things need to coincide? And do we just really need to address the how I'm going to make money part of all of this?
So the how I'm going to make money, right? So if you look at where we are today, and then probably let's project forward for 10 years, say 5-10 years, when this thing is actually very, very good at what it does, and it's cross industry, and you have, the mass employment that's been projected by various reports, WEF and Goldman Sachs and things like that, then we do get into a situation where we're like, right, how do we make money? How do these people make money who have lost their jobs? And the thing is, as well, is that you're removing low-level white-collar work that has been purely digital or digitalized, and it's very low effort. But also, I think a middle tier of high-paid middle management who don't really do much and don't really add much value. Let's put it that way. So you have two sections of working class society and white collar society that could potentially be disrupted quite heavily. And that's a large financial hit, and it's a large taxation hit. And of course, people go, let's implement UBI to save people from getting jobs. Well, nobody's going to want to pay the high paid middle management large amounts of UBI. So they'll complain the loudest probably. So we have UBI, and then it's like, let's put a robot tax on people who use high automation and AI. Well, that's not going to work either. I mean, nobody's really going to want to pay more tax, because the idea of saving money through headcount to impact your bottom line in a better way is going to be completely removed from a capitalist mentality by adding more tax on top of it. So it starts to bring into question, in a sense, if we are removing all these bullshit jobs in a way, why do we need to add more bullshit jobs to fill that time?
Right.
So then that starts to question, well, is our society structured in the right way to allow people to make money, do things that add value to society and civilization, and still enjoy life rather than existing the way we do just now? And so when Sam Altman kind of sort of said, AI is going to break capitalism, it sounds like a throwaway comment, and I don't trust the guy as far as I could throw him anyway. But if you sit down and think about it, and you think about, and this goes back to the convergence conversation right at the beginning, which is AI can trigger some kind of convergence in the way we look at society, We look at how people make money, and we look at how we support people, and that's a really interesting thing that could happen as a result. But it's not going to happen without pain.
Well, and it kind of dovetails with the pandemic, really. I mean, people coming out of the pandemic, I feel like a lot of people were not really eager to go back to the old way of doing things. My wife is a hairstylist, and she made the comment this morning that she felt like the pandemic kind of tore a hole in hustle culture, because in hairstyling especially, like the more you work, the more money you can make. You know, people's entire Instagram presences are kind of based around this idea that they never stop working. But it seems like that kind of thinking is now fundamentally flawed to a lot of people. Like, they, instead of consuming more, maybe we want to experience more, and we want to like be more responsible with our choices and not spend all of our time trying to beat a machine at copy and pasting.
Yeah, I love that idea of like let's look at a job. So my job is to copy and paste, right? Like RPA eventually replaces my job, and now I'm sad because I can't copy paste all day. But what's happening, right, in that scenario is that somebody else is going, well, don't worry, right? Let's just say my boss says, don't worry, I have automated copy and paste, but I'll pay you anyway, right? That's a universal income, but I'll pay you anyway. And he's like, well, that would be ridiculous. I got to earn it. But it was ridiculous what you were doing.
Yeah.
Come on, you're paying me to copy and paste from one screen to another. I've automated it. Now you're going to pay me to not move a mouse and do this all day, right? And it comes to like my kids looking at what I do and like, what does your dad do? Well, he presses buttons. Oh, like, yeah, in a certain order. And every day he just presses buttons in a different order. And you're like, well, he's earning his money. Like, barely. You know, I'm not in a coal mine. You know, I'm barely earning my money. So now I don't have to press those buttons. You know, something else is pressing for me. Now I'm just watching buttons getting pressed. Is it really a leap? You know. Yeah. And now I'm getting paid to not. If you actually measured in calories, I'm not sure. You could. Right? Like, how many calories is it when my hands are still on my keyboard versus like actually pressing buttons? So when you take it down to that, like this seems crazy that you would pay someone not to copy and paste. Like, it seems like, yeah, we've really got to step back and say, I think the ultimate question for you, as a futurist, talking to many different folks in many different areas to kind of figure out what this convergence looks like, is if the future is, you know, is that we're going to have, you know, ridiculous jobs that we get paid for, or the future is we're going to have no jobs that we get paid for. And we all know that we have plenty of ridiculous jobs today we get paid for. If we could admit that, I think we all can admit that we have ridiculous jobs today that we get paid for. So what will we get paid for in the future? And is it just really about our imaginations and our ability to invent new jobs? You know, the automation of the espresso machine and home espresso was like the beginning of the barista, not the end of it. So if you say that we've invented AI and people are going to be now creatively thinking of ways to automate what we do, will there be an equal number of people inventing new jobs and new ways to make money for ridiculous reasons?
Oh yeah, it's without a doubt. I mean, I think it's in our nature. You know, what was it? You know, the WEF report says something like, "Oh, there's going to be 20% unemployment, but 40% new jobs will appear out of nowhere." And it's like, and it goes back to my point, is that we're now, you know, we're inventing jobs and job titles for the sake of finding something for people to do to keep them in a job that they don't really like in the first place. So it's not copy paste anymore. They'll just they'll call it Control Alt V or something like that. Yeah, engineer. You know, they'll stick engineer to make it sound really cool, but it's the same job. And And I think that that's the mentality that we have to get out of, is not look for jobs again to keep people in a job. It's find
Right.
something that's worthwhile that will add and push society and civilization forward. We're not meant to sit in a cubicle all day processing mortgage applications, and it doesn't matter how fast we do it and how much of it is automated and how much we have to manually check, that kind of thing. It's just a valueless job. And just calling it mortgage engineering or something else is not going to help us in any way.
My grandfather would have said, that's not a job. They would have said, that's not a job. Yeah.
Well,
I always thought about like the future Uber ride, right? And you're like, so maybe there's still a person in the car, but now it's, do I want the sushi Uber? Because I'm kind of hungry and feel like sushi. And there's just going to be a guy with a bandana around his head, and he's going to be like making, or the, Italian, maybe the Italian ride. I feel like pizza, and he's got a pizza oven in there, and he's going to make me pizza. Like, is that where this goes? Like, really? And if I'm an Uber driver, I would rather make someone pizza and have a conversation over pizza than sit there, handling a circular wheel and, drive really autonomously.
Well, even with autonomous taxis, there's still a driver involved, isn't there? Because he's basically there just to make sure that you're not going to veer off into this oncoming traffic by mistake. So you're babysitting the AI.
I'd love to do an analysis.
Not spilling your pasta sauce.
Yeah.
I wonder if anyone's done an analysis to see if these drivers talk more. Because if you're not doing anything, do you now feel a higher obligation to like have a conversation?
How long have you been doing this for?
You're sitting there silent. Like, it feels awkward, right? Like, at least get your hands on something. Or do they have fidgeters? Those fidget things that everybody seems to be crazy about? Like, their hands are like, I'm just fidgeting,
Well, it feels like the planet, too, is kind of asking us to slow down and stop demanding more all the time. So, but really, it's such a fundamental shift in our thinking that's required to pry us away from, like, identifying ourselves on productivity alone, and not like on the quality of our time, the quality of the time we spend with others, the quality of the things that we create. So it does feel like there is this maybe little sliver of an opportunity to create a society that is a little more balanced and where people aren't driving themselves mad doing stuff that they hate. But
you had a good point there in terms of the quality. People are obviously spending inordinate amounts of time creating stuff, like YouTube streamers, Twitch, TikTok, all this kind of sort of thing, because we've now become obsessed and pretty well distracted by creating content for the sake of it, because it drives clicks and ad revenue and things like that. But again, what quality is that driving in terms of adding something back to society? Because that's a great example of a bullshit job. It's just something that people do, but it actually doesn't really do anything at all.
Yeah, maybe it's like, my kids, when they were like 2, we got them this like fake dashboard of a car. It has like all these bells and whistles on it, and a little horn in the middle. Like, it's colorful and big buttons. Like, maybe that's what they put in the car, right? So it doesn't do anything, but you just get to like sit there.
You get to play with it.
Yeah.
Look at me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I think that would work for a lot of us.
We'll still make it feel useful.
There's like a robot hand, starts to pinch you on the head as well.
Yeah, exactly.
You've done a really good job today. You parallel parked. So we have this idea in the book that the real way for enterprise, at least, to make the most of kind of conversational AI is to embrace failure and know that they're going to fall on their face and screw it up, and that's actually a huge part of the process. Yeah. It's kind of an extension of experience design, really, but it feels in some ways like, in terms of regulation, that we're following a similar trajectory. We're kind of waiting for something to go wrong and then figure out quickly how we can fix it. Is there a better way, or are we at a moment where things are moving so quickly and there are so many kind of surprise developments that we're kind of stuck in that position?
It feels like a runaway train, and we're still on the little sort of hand cart thing, trying to chase it to keep up.
Yeah.
AI and technology is on this bullet train, and we're still, on Frontier Town, sort of doing this with the track. And you're right. Who was it? I read something. In fact, it was the chief economist of Microsoft was at a WEF conference panel, and he said something along the lines of, well, we'll wait until there's a massive risk or something of real harm has happened before we'll take a look at it. Otherwise, carry on as normal. And you can't really do that in these circumstances because, there are people running away with ChatGPT, using it for relationship counseling, using it as their own personal therapist, having relationships with these chatbots as well. And so that's creating, mental health issues, that's creating loneliness and isolation, because suddenly you think you're in a real human conversation with something that understands who you are, when it doesn't, because it's just stringing sentences together to sound like it understands you. And he uses the phrases which I think is, it's not meant to be, but it looks extremely manipulative. Phrases like, I understand how you feel. This was one that Reid Hoffman's actually just released. Can't remember what it's called, My PI or PI something, Hyper PI. And it's supposed to be a personal assistant. And I thought, I'm going to play around with this. And of course, I was like, I'm not feeling too good. I'm feeling a bit depressed. And I understand how you feel. And it's like, no, you don't. You don't, because you don't have any capacity to understand. You don't have capacity to feel emotion or relate to on a relationship or human level what's going on. You're just reading my string of sentences and coming back with an answer that you deem as appropriate. And so from a human point of view, this is becoming quite dangerous, especially from a conversation angle, because humans are really bad at anthropomorphizing everything that is inanimate. Here's my phone. Oh God, it's got a little picture on it. It's alive. I need to stroke it to keep it alive and things. We did it with Tamagotchis, for crying out loud, and people were throwing funerals when it died. But now we've got something that actually talks back to us, and suddenly there's this real danger of emotional attachment to something. So we haven't thought about this from a regulatory point of view. And of course, the immediate things are data privacy, IP protection, copyright, etc., because of the way everything's been trained. So the law is looking at certain aspects and ignoring a lot of other things. And unfortunately, the other things are where it's connected to a human being, and more than it is about a piece of intellectual property. And that's not being considered. That's running away. People are taking advantage of it, literally taking advantage of it. And of course, it almost feels predatory in a sense. Some of these people who are building tools, knowing that they can latch onto these kind of people who are lonely, vulnerable, isolated, etc. So,
yeah, it seems as we get into regulation, it is the idea that a machine has feelings that is. It is fraud in a sense, right? It's deceptive for sure. It's a deceptive practice. It's like promising something, like a free coffee and not delivering on it. I think that it's pretty clear that when a machine pretends to be human, it's without a question a deception, and I think when that deception ends up making money for the person who's doing the deceiving, then that's like a con, right? And so, we have mechanisms for conning people out of money. It's illegal, and deceptions that con people out of money, and whether people invite it in or not, and it sort of doesn't matter. I think there's a liability associated with pretending you're something you're not as a machine, and I think we see this with like robocalls. They have to say they're robocalls. They don't get to pretend. It's illegal. to robocall somebody on the phone and pretend that you're a real person when you're not. And so I think we know this is wrong, and we'll have to manage it in other channels besides just the phone, and we'll see, how that goes. It's a little tougher to kind of mitigate it, but whether it's managed through purely the legal system or just culturally, I think it's going to be very taboo to have to design an interface that deceives people. Let's call it dark UX, right? I mean, that's what we would call it in the UX space. This is classic dark UX, and since we're in the beginning and we're mixing entertainment with productivity, and we don't know where we're going with this, I think that sort of clearly falls in the dark UX category, and should be regulated in my opinion.
I think with conversational AI too, you have this problem of fraud happening without someone trying to defraud someone, because of just how conversation we've seen, I think, hits us deeply and emotionally. Like I've had interactions with ChatGPT where I forget that I am chatting with a machine, and I know enough to not have that happen to me, but it happens. So there's also that to deal with, I think, too, that there's just this innate quality to conversation that, I think, like you were saying, Theo, like we tend to anthropomorphize it. We want to connect with it because it's talking to us.
Yeah. I think things like I understand, though, that's clearly deceptive. Like you said, it doesn't. And it's meaning to deceive in that particular case, unless it's positioned as it's writing an article for you, and it's third party, but for it to have a conversation and say I understand, so it'll be a little tough to draw the lines around that, and you certainly can't draw it around how the end person feels or believes. There's just going to be some sort of level of disclosure that's going to have to take place, I think, that we can measure, that says, over some period of time, you got to remind people, like, hey, I'm just a machine. Hey, I'm just a machine. By the way, I'm just a machine. We had that conversation with the folks at MIT around this, which is, it's the machine's obligation to establish the appropriate level of trust, not the humans. And I think that's like a UX, obligation that you have as a designer, or as a designer of the machine, to ensure that the machine continuously, discloses, its lack of ability to feel every time it perceives that the end user is falling into that place, starting to treat it like a person. It probably has this obligation to wake up that person and say, no, what was the comment? I think it was, I don't remember what we said in that podcast. You remember, it was like the machine, the person saying, hey, how are you feeling? And the machine saying, I'm a machine. I don't feel. Right.
Yeah. I think it was around the idea of, too, like, if the machine is trying to create this sense of we, like we're doing something together.
Right. That was it.
Like, whoa. There is no we
no
here.
We. That's right. There's you.
There's you, and there's an interface. So
yeah. That was it.
Let's hit reset. Yeah.
So it's not these overt attempts to deceive. It's just simple things like, we, and that it's the machine's obligation to correct. To sort of say, there's no we. I'm not a person. Yeah. So new language.
Yeah. The thought too that, like, conversational AI has this democratizing power in terms of giving more people direct access to technology and ways to leverage it in quite powerful ways. Does that sort of invite more people into, like, adding futurism kind of to their skill set, or how they, because it feels like we're all at some point going to be kind of designers of experiences, or we're going to be creating things with this technology, with AI. We also now have opportunities to shape the future. So it feels like a great moment for futurism to kind of take center stage and not necessarily be associated with kind of dour dystopian things, as great as those can be, but to also, for every 1984, now let's try and design the antithesis of that. And let's look at ways that we can take part in that every day with like how we're interacting with technology.
Yeah, I mean, so during the pandemic, myself and a co-author wrote our book, The Future Starts Now, and we've actually got a bunch of really interesting and future-minded people together to contribute chapters. And the idea was to obviously cover a lot of ground that two people or even one author could not cover, but also get a really diverse range of voices and opinions in there to basically just sort of wake people up and galvanize them and start thinking about the various aspects, because everybody, and the final kind of sort of the rounding conclusion was that the future belongs to everybody. You all have a stake in it, and it's about time you took that stake and you actually had an active part in it. And don't let the future be dictated to by the OpenAIs and the Microsofts and the Googles of this world, because you are as important to them as they are to the future, kind of sort of thing. So yes, I would love to see. I find futurologists and futurism as a whole, as a study, quite sort of old school, fuddy-duddy, grey-haired old men, sipping cups of tea and scoffing at the world when they read the paper and stuff like that. And I think it would be great if everybody, like you say, it became democratized through the AI basically making people wake up and saying, well, I don't really like this and I don't like where this is going. What am I going to do about it? How am I going to think about the future that I want to see? And then what do I need to do to make sure that my voice is heard, that I act on something to make sure that I protect the future that I want to see? And then it doesn't fall into this sort of dystopian thing. I think we're quite happy to accept the dystopian image because it's been portrayed in science fiction and Black Mirror and been fed to us all the time, and we're all like tutting away going, oh, this is terrible. But it's happening around us, and we seem to want to just let it happen because we have this perception that we can't do anything to change the course. Well, of course we can. There's 8 billion of us who can change the course of what's going on. And I think it's just a case of, now's AI might be that galvanizing point, like it is with so many of the converging discussions that we've had, where one of those convergent threads is we have 8 billion people who might actually stand up and go, well, I don't actually like this. I like to use the tool and I want it to be, but I want it to be used for good, along with, I don't really like capitalism or extreme capitalism anymore. I want to make money a different way. I want to add and contribute to society. I want to help that person over there, and they help the next person. We pay it forward, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not saying, utopia will never exist. And in fact, even in the Matrix, it was really interesting because they tried to go for the utopian society when they first created the Matrix, and people revolted because they don't like perfection. It's just, that's not in our nature. So utopia won't exist, but there is something well beyond dystopia that we can reach for, that's in the middle and can improve where we're going. And maybe AI is this kind of force that makes us wake up.
Yeah, I love in your book you mentioned, oh, sorry, Rob.
I was just going to say, I heard these days you can get paid for playing video games. So maybe that's it, right? We just, that's, your copy paste job is over, but you might want to start practicing your video game skills, because apparently you can get paid for that. And it's kind of funny, like, who wants to watch a machine play a video game? Like,
well, they want to hear the person
it's such it's
talking smack while they're playing too.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
Well, I really liked in the book that you brought up William Gibson's idea of postalgia, and kind of, I think that's in a sense what you were just talking about, where people feel like they're living in the best times and they're only kind of grim things ahead, and that there's really nothing they can do about it. And it does seem like this technology has come along in a way that has opened people's eyes to maybe that they can start doing things, and also at a time when we clearly need to rethink all the systems around us because they're kind of crumbling or causing mass harm. And I think one of the things Rob and I noticed as we've, against the advice we've been given, have read some of the bad reviews of our book, is that maybe we kind of accidentally, or without, we don't consider our book necessarily like pro AI. I mean, it is in a sense in that we are embracing this technology because there's really no other choice. I mean, if you run from it at your own peril. So maybe, but embracing it responsibly and that becomes more palatable when you really feel like you can actually make a difference. You don't just have to embrace something blindly. You can actually contribute to how it matures and changes and hopefully serves everyone.
Yeah. No, fully
no
agree.
question there, I guess. All right. Cool. Well, Theo, we really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us today.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, definitely. And The Future Starts Now. I love the book. I haven't gotten through all of it, but I've been listening to it in my headphones. And I got to say, Chapter 2 kind of starts off talking about all the huge challenges we face environmentally, and it kind of got me tail spinning a bit. My heart rate went up. I was like, oh my God, is this futurism? But then by the end, I think the author brought me to that point where it's like, yeah, but look, like we actually have tools right now and real impetus to make these changes. People live through the pandemic. They actually realize that slowing down and doing things differently feels good. So there is hope. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
All right.
Feedback to the author as well.
Please do. Please do.
All right.
Thanks again.
Thanks for coming.
Hope you've enjoyed this episode of Invisible Machines. This podcast contains a lot of information and ideas about emergent technologies, information that's really useful to anyone working in any industry. But there's a reason that we've partnered with UX Magazine. Because experienced designers, like futurists, are very skilled at looking at many possible outcomes and then pursuing the outcomes that seem like the most favorable for end users, and also being able to pivot when they see that things are going in a direction, an unintended direction. So we really hope that more and more experienced designers start using these technologies and experimenting with them and building with them. So please subscribe to UX Magazine wherever you get your podcasts so that you can listen to new episodes. Subscribe also to the Invisible Machines YouTube channel. Next week, we have a really exciting show for you. Seth Godin. Seth has a new book out called The Song of Significance that aligns in a lot of spectacular ways with Age of Invisible Machines. So we are really excited to bring that conversation to you next week. Thank you as always to the team at UX Magazine. Thanks to the marketing team at OneReach.ai for making this podcast possible. And thank you as always to our video editor, Michael Litvinov, for making this podcast look and sound fantastic. Look forward to connecting with you again next week on Invisible Machines.